Welcome to The Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas with Bela and Mike. Hello, I'm Bela Musitz, a former three-time entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and now actually retired. Before I retired, I was the David D. Ray Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship here at Clarkson University.
And coming to you from Münster, Germany, I'm Mike Wasserman, Professor of International Management at the Münster University of Applied Sciences. Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoy listening to this as much as Bela and I enjoy creating it. Several of you have asked, Mike, why do you do this? And I can tell you for sure it's not about making money, but Bela and I are friends, and we like to learn from smart, interesting people about how the world is changing. We both are interested in innovation and entrepreneurship, and we like to overlay our observations and compare them with the lessons that we've both learned over 3+ decades as entrepreneurs, investors, managers, and professors. To do this, we put together our network of interesting friends, former students, and business partners, along with other people we've met more recently, to bring you interesting stories, ideas, and insights into innovation, entrepreneurship, and the people that take unconventional paths to find happiness at work and in life.
So today's guest is Richard Stokes. He is the founder and CEO of Winston Privacy. This is his second company. His first company was AdGooroo, which was a data integrator and basically a company that helped advertisers connect to people who might be interested in buying their products. And he aggregated data from the internet to do this. And after doing that for a number of years, after they were acquired, he sort of said, I'm not sure this is the right thing to do anymore. And he saw all sorts of privacy issues. So he started his second company, which is Winston Privacy, which is in the business of, as he puts it, stopping the ad industry and others from spying on you. So sort of an interesting twist and pivot there in his career. And so we had a great conversation over Skype. So, Mike, what was one thing that sort of stuck out at you?
Well, I think Rich was an interesting person with a background in advertising. And there's a point in the conversation that you'll hear that he says, not all advertising is bad. And, I guess as somebody who kind of teaches a little bit about marketing, it's this continuum between educational on the best positive side, as advertising should educate consumers about a product's features and benefits, persuasive to convince you to buy something, and then manipulative on the other side, right? Which is to get you to buy something that you really don't need. And now with the advent of technology and all this tracking and using your location and the things that the products that you search for on the internet in order to package together data and sell this to companies as part of advertising, quote unquote, he saw this problem that I think pissed him off, right? It made him angry. And I love, we've just seen this time and time again, Bela, where an entrepreneur kind of gets fired up about a problem. And it's where some people might just complain to their partner or their friend or their coworker about it. He saw an opportunity there for a new business and a new technology base that he could use to solve the problem. So I think that's the underlying theme that's really a cool story here.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. It was a cool story. So let's dive into the interview with Richard Stokes. Hello, listeners. Bela here. I'm connected via Skype with Rich Stokes. He is the founder and CEO of Winston Privacy. This is Richard's second company. His first was AdGooroo, which was an ad data aggregator and collector that was acquired. So he had a successful exit there, and he spent 6 years in the industry. And at one point, he had an epiphany. He realized that the initial project he set out to make collecting of data had gone too far. So he left that to do the opposite, to stop the ad industry and others from spying on you. So I think this should be an interesting conversation and discussions. Welcome to the show, Rich.
Thanks, Bela. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. So tell us a little bit about your new company here, Winston Privacy, and what does it do?
Yeah, so Winston is a hardware device that you plug into your home network, and it's intended to take the bad guys off your network. And by bad guys, we mean more or less all the players in the surveillance machine that is tracking consumers, everything that they do, recording that, using it against them in various ways. So, the Cambridge Analyticas are just sort of the tip of the iceberg. There's thousands of other companies and entities which are collecting this data, and Winston's designed to get them off your network and make everything do a lot more private.
Yeah. The first time that the light went off in my thick skull about all the data that people collect is I think it was either the FBI or the CIA was going to one of the cell phone providers to get information on users.
Yeah.
And I thought that was sort of interesting, right?
Yeah, bounty hunters as well. Of course, ad companies have been doing that since the early 2000s.
Yeah. Yeah. So so you said it's a piece of hardware. Was there a secret sauce here? Is there some invention that you guys did?
Well, yeah, there's quite a few. We filed 2 sets of claims to protect our work. But the reason it is hardware is, when I was in the early stages of planning Winston, I look back over the last 20 years of privacy and I wondered, why it failed. And frankly, it did fail. There were ad blockers out there, browser extensions, VPNs, and yet none of it had really done anything to stop consumer surveillance. So most of it is a placebo. We decided to make it hardware because, 2 reasons. One, it's easier to set up, just 60 seconds. You don't have to do a lot of installation of software packages, things like that. Makes it more suitable for a mainstream consumer audience. And the second reason is because it protects all of the devices in your home. And the reason for that is really important because, advertisers and big tech, they're putting these devices in people's homes. It's not so much for convenience, although, of course, some of it is. But they're using the devices that you have installed, and even the permutations of the different devices that you have installed to further track you. So we have to protect those as well.
And by other devices, you're meaning like smart TVs, things like these Alexa and Siri type devices?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So how does this work? In other words, I spend a fair amount of time on my laptop in the house and, doing things that I do. But I also spend a fair amount of time on my cell phone when I'm out of the house and I'm not connected to my network. So I'm connected to my cell phone provider's network. Is there any help there in that regard?
Yeah, in fact, we have a prototype application. It's a mobile app for iOS and Android, which allows you to establish an encrypted tunnel between your phone and your tablet when you're away from home. And your Winston in your home. So no matter where you're at, whether you're on a Starbucks wireless network or you're just driving in your car and you're on the cellular network, this app is on and it stays on as you move from network to network and keeps all of your traffic encrypted.
Yeah. Oh, very nice because, everywhere we go, we're connected these days.
That's right.
So just kind of securing my home is one important step, but it's not a complete step.
That's right. And that really kind of plays into the conversation about entrepreneurship. You have to really focus on doing one thing really well before you branch out. And so, early on, we recognized the mobile component for this was going to be big, but we had to get the privacy protection really solid in the home first, and really just knock out the user experience before we started expanding. So for us, it was largely a matter of focus.
Yes. And you sell this product, this box, you said, to end users.
That's right. It's currently selling on Kickstarter. That campaign ends in just a few days. It will then be available for a little while on Indiegogo before we switch back to selling on our website.
Yeah. So talk to me about Kickstarter. What was your experience like there? There's a lot of entrepreneurs who read about it and want to sort of understand that a little better. So fill in the blanks there. Yeah.
So Kickstarter for a hardware company is pretty risky. I think it was somebody at Techstars told me a couple years ago. They said, most of the hardware companies that go on Kickstarter end up crowdfunding their way out of business. And the reason is, unlike software, you have a bill of materials and a supply chain to manage. And inevitably what happens is you're in the early planning phases in order to get your business. Your partners are going to quote you pretty low prices. But as you move along and get more established, your prices throughout the supply chain are going to constantly increase. And so before you know it, your BOM could be 60 to 80, maybe even 100% higher than you originally anticipated. So what a lot of hardware companies on Kickstarter do is they come out shooting too early. They underprice the product because, the people who are helping them on Kickstarter want the product to be as cheap as possible to get more business. They're paid on commission. And so you end up in a situation where if you've done this, then you're actually selling product at a massive loss. And, I was looking at a company that did this yesterday, and they're really suffering for it because they ended up having to cut corners everywhere from the software to the hardware itself to shipping. And it was just really all around a bad experience for everybody involved. So what we did was we worked backwards. We didn't think of it as crowdfunding. We thought of it as a way to prove demand for a product that we already had just about ready to sell. So, we spent 17 months in R&D. We did traditional market-driven research, product configuration studies, and so on. We put the product together, did an engineering trial followed by 2 field trials. We did all that before we launched our Kickstarter campaign. So that was a little bit of a different experience for us.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're almost using Kickstarter to identify some early adapters and early users and get good feedback from them, as opposed to helping you, define the product and develop the product.
That's exactly right.
Excellent. So let's take a step back. Let's talk about Rich and what he was doing when he was 6 and 7 years old. Tell me about your childhood a little bit.
So my father got a TRS 80 back in 1977 or 78. So I was a real young kid. I was kind of like the kids today, who are on tablets at a very, very early age. But I was on a trash 80. I loved it. Yeah. And so, I learned to code on that. I eventually was in a situation where I was, by 5th grade, I was telling the teachers, showing them how to use the Apple IIes in the computer lab at school, which we were lucky enough to have at that point. So, I spent my teenage years pretty much in Radio Shack. I went there all the time. I'd get parts. I'd build stuff, just very curious individual. That kind of led me naturally to studying electrical and computer engineering at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And I came out of there and, started my professional career.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. And is there any sort of entrepreneurship in the family?
Well, I think entrepreneurship used to be much more common than it is today. My dad owns an auto shop on the south side of Chicago, and he started that in the early 60s. So there were a lot more small businesses back then. I think it was probably more common than it is today.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess in a way, yes, that counts.
So you were sort of exposed to the notion of having your own business and understanding the trials and tribulations of doing something like that.
Yeah, to some extent. I didn't really get into the business as much, but certainly, it wasn't a steady paycheck, office gig.
Right. And when you graduated from Urbana, what was the next step?
So I went to work for a company called Lante here in Chicago, which eventually went public as a consulting company run by Mark Tebby. I went from company to company, getting experience as more or less a contractor consultant throughout that time. Just worked on a whole variety of projects, and it gave me a really good perspective, I think, on a lot of different business apps. And, it was sometime, I want to say in the late 90s, and Alta Vista was still the search engine of choice. So this is a long time ago. And kind of funny, I still remember having this epiphany one day. I'm like, all these people are using the search engine and typing in searches. I wonder if there was a way to get that and use that for something. This was in the late 90s. I didn't act on that for a while, but eventually I did. And so it was a little bit prescient.
Wow, cool. Now, you said an interesting thing there. So the first firm you worked for out of college was a consulting operation?
Yes.
There's not that there's themes from all the people we've interviewed, but there is I would say, a disproportionate number of folks who their first job out of school is, one of these consulting firms. And they all talk about this notion of getting a broad exposure to various different sort of opportunities and companies. And then that really gave them a very solid foundation for when they decided to branch out on their own.
I never thought about that, but that definitely rings true in my experience. I mean, it's not just seeing, different, business models and, technical environments and so on, but you're also dealing with a lot of people in different roles. Yeah. Especially in a consulting role, you're exposed to marketing and sales a lot more than you would be, as a salaried engineer. Right.
Yeah. I mean, you could be an electrical computer science guy locked in a closet and, being a bit facetious and not have a lot of exposure to sort of how the business works, various different factors and metrics that drive things. So right. I think this notion of a consulting opportunity is a good solid foundation, and I've heard that before. So what sort of spurred you to leave that and kind of go out on your own?
So it's kind of a interesting path. In the early 2000s, I had begun my MBA at Northwestern. And what I learned from that is I really, really liked advertising. I was just fascinated by it. And so I made the choice to go work for Leo Burnett, which is a very well-known global advertising agency. And so while I was there, I was learning a lot, working on a bunch of different projects there as well. But a couple of my former employees from a past position, they had gone off and started their own company. And that company was called Giant Software. So very few people have heard of this company today, but back in the day, they were kind of big. And what they had created was an anti-spyware program that collected all of the threat data from individual computers and allowed them to analyze it and find new threats faster than anybody else. And so Microsoft ended up buying them eventually. I think it only took about 2 years. And so that became Windows Defender. So everybody has heard of this today. But my former employees, they invented that. And so while this was going on, they said, hey, you really got to check out this anti-spyware industry. This is pretty incredible. I mean, this stuff really sells. We're helping a lot of people. It's a lot of fun. And so I looked at it. I was like, I kind of want to work around the marketing side of it. I don't want to, work on the technology as much. I want a different experience. And so what I created was a consumer reports testing lab. And so we had these computers. We would flash them with a new image. We would install 2,000 or 3,000 viruses on this image. It's spyware programs. And we would just run these programs and see what percentage of them they could detect and clean up. And we published these reports online. And people loved them. They clicked through to the products. And we would take a commission of whatever we sold. And it ended up being so lucrative at that point that I then quit my job at Leo Burnett to do this. So while this was going on, yet another person who I was involved with at the time, he reached out and he said, hey, look, you're selling a lot of anti-spyware. You're my number 2 vendor. The number 1 guy is selling 6 times as much as you, and I have no idea how he's doing. I said, great. So I called up the usual players. I called up ComScore. I called up Nielsen. I called up Hitwise. Those are the 3 companies. ComScore and Nielsen didn't even return my call. And Hitwise sent me back a report that said, hey, they're getting their traffic off the search engines. And I was like, oh, the search engines. And this is back before Google had even hit $1 billion in revenue at this point. They had just launched AdWords, the self-service platform. for advertisers,
Right.
which was an innovation. And so they could not tell me anything more than that. So I wrote software, which I installed literally on my media center in my living room. And this would go out, it would crawl the net, crawl the search engines, it would find every competitor's ad. And I compiled that, developed some heuristics around it to create my own marketing search campaign. So once I had done that, the tables turned. I ended up growing massively. I became the number one anti-spyware affiliate in the U.S. for a couple of years there. And I turned that into my project at Northwestern in entrepreneurship. That became AdGooroo, which I got a B on, by the way. That was my, I got a B on. But I did end up quitting, going full-time, doing that. And, I started that in late 2004. By early 2005, we had our first customers and we were on our way.
And was AdGooroo, how was that funded?
So initially, I put it together with just equity and self-funding. Then we ended up taking a small angel investment. I mean, in total, it was, around $600,000.
Okay. And that was it. That's all the outside capital you guys took in?
Yes.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And so speaking of funding, I'm going to bounce around here a little bit, but in your current business, Winston Privacy, why? It sounds like you're a successful entrepreneur. You've done some pretty good things. You could probably go knock on the door of most venture capital firms and get an audience and probably raise some capital that way. What's the path that you're taking and why?
Well, that's exactly what we did. So when I was putting together the plan around this, I thought about bootstrapping it. And I thought, well, I could do a really mediocre job for, maybe $400,000. And this would be very high risk for me personally. And I, began socializing this and, some other people in my network thought it was a great idea. They convinced me very wisely, you don't want to take on all this risk yourself. You need to not only diversify that, but you also want to get other people involved just because it expands your network and gets other people working on it as well. So that's what we ended up doing. So I left the ad industry in October of 2017. I then set up shop at M-Hub, which is the hardware accelerator here in Chicago. And basically, it was just me and a whiteboard and the internet. So I would put together quantitative marketing studies, run those in a double-blind panel, all that. That was all census balanced. So, it wasn't people I knew. I'd actually go out there and hire survey companies to do this stuff for me. And put the whole concept together. And by December of that year, we had a pretty solid concept. Every investor I talked to, like you said, it's a lot easier once you've had an exit. They do want to talk to you, but they all pretty much said no. And they said, hey, nobody really cares about privacy. And I beg to differ. What I had found was everybody, almost everywhere, universally cares about privacy. Now, only a very small percentage of people actually did something about it, and that was the critical difference. And so my research indicated things that they had never suspected, and the privacy industry had never suspected, and that's what became the germ of Winston. So even with all that, though, it was still very hard in the beginning. What turned around for me was Cambridge Analytica. So when that scandal broke in April of 2018, it was like a Christmas gift. We were funded 2 months later.
Yeah. It's not, the timing is important.
Right.
For sure. Got it. So, would you be comfortable saying how much money you guys have raised?
I will say it's in the low seven figures.
Oh, okay. Excellent. And so where are you? I think you mentioned this earlier, but let's just refresh memories here. So where's Winston Privacy now? Sounds like you're getting about ready to ship out your beta level product?
Well, actually, we did our beta levels, our beta products in February. We did another round in May. So we've gotten a lot of feedback and we've been iterating. And so that'll that'll keep going each time we send out more units. It's more than the batch before. And it's not a matter of not having the units ready to go. It's just a matter of, we want to be very thoughtful and give attention to the people who need help, as they find and discover new problems, things like that. So we have a whole lot of product, thousands of units ready to ship. It's just a matter of us, staging those and shipping those out over the rest of the year.
Yeah, and shipping them out, it sounds like shipping them out in a manner in which you can support them as they get delivered and set up by your customers.
Exactly. One of the things that I was pushed really hard on was to go faster by the investors. And they kept saying, hey, why don't you ship out, 10,000 in 2018 and then try to get 100,000 in 2019. And what I'm like, you don't realize you have to put this stuff out. And you have to really strive hard to get a good customer experience. When you're developing a new technology, you're going to break a lot of things. There's going to be some challenges all along the way. And so you just have to be really thoughtful and methodical about how you roll it out. You don't want to go too fast because, if the marketing gets too far ahead of the technology, then I think that's where you get in trouble.
Right. So if I had one of these boxes installed on my network here at home, how would I know it's working? What difference would I see in my sort of daily browsing around the internet?
Well, most of the web is going to load a lot faster. So on average, having one of these devices, your page load times go down by half or more. So that's the big thing. And then the amount of clutter that you see and the number of pop-ups and all kinds of stuff that are just on the web, that all goes away. And so the web becomes a lot less stressful, as you're using it. When I leave home, for instance, if I'm on a mobile phone or I'm not on a Winston network and I have to use the web, it's really aggravating. Just the amount of nuisance stuff that's out there. So that's the first thing. You see obviously a lot less advertising because the advertising depends on tracking and surveilling users. When I do see ads, surprisingly, they tend to be house ads. So I got my first Smokey the Bear, only you could put out forest fires ad a couple of weeks ago. I was really proud of that. That meant that nobody in the ad ecosystem could figure out how to sell something to me. So they gave me Smokey the Bear.
Right.
So you see that, and then we've been working on building feedback loops into the product. We don't collect any data. We don't ship it off the box. So this has been a real challenge. But one of the things that we've discovered that people like seeing is how much data they're saving. So we figured out a way to estimate based on what we block, how many bytes that we've saved, and we display that, both on our dashboard as well as the browser extensions that we ship with the product.
Okay. And let's say I'm interested in buying a new car. So I go search some, car websites, getting information and data, and then without a Winston box, I'll start getting ads served up to me from various different car dealerships. What if I want that to happen? Is there a way that I can selectively sort of turn things on or off? Because maybe for a short period of time, getting those ads is of benefit to me. But at some point in time, I'm not interested in them anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is one of the things that we discovered. There were all these points of friction with privacy software. Privacy has been around for 20 plus years, and people were just doing it wrong. And we discovered these different areas and reasons why this had never caught on. And so one of these reasons is this very snobbish or cynical attitude, all advertising is bad, right? And I had this conversation with somebody on the privacy subreddit a few weeks ago, and he wrote an essay about how all advertising, no matter what, is inherently evil, and it's designed to influence people against their free will. And I just don't believe that. So the point of friction there was we want to be agnostic about what people do, but we want to flip the model, right? We said instead of opting in to all of the surveillance and tracking every time you go on the web, and letting these people on your network, even though you don't know that they're there, we're going to flip it. We're going to say, look, you're going to opt out by default. And if you want to see ads, if you want to share your location, or you want to do other things, we give you a button. You press that button, and it works as normal.
Got it. So what do you expect a device like this to sell for?
So that's a really interesting point. Pricing with any new, startup is pretty much a top priority. So we have played around with a bunch of different pricing models. We went into Kickstarter with the best one we had discovered so far. And that was, we're going to retail this for $249. We'll give you a year for free. We'll charge $8 a month after, and that's to cover every device you own. And that was based on a lot of different factors, but we price tested it, and it did pretty well. We said, well, look, as we put more and more of these units out, we get the economies of scale, we'll get the hardware below $200. We recognized that there was going to be a big lift in sales from that. So that was, the best pricing, let's call it a hypothesis. Maybe it was better than a hypothesis. I'd say it was a theory at that stage. So we were about a week into the Kickstarter, and somebody on my team pointed out, this is a great opportunity to try out the lifetime subscription. Would people respond to this? And we said, okay. So we put a lifetime subscription out there where you pay us up front, basically the lifetime value of the current offer, and you never have to pay us again, right? And that solves working capital needs, and it also ended up being very attractive to users, which was, I'll be honest, I didn't predict how popular it was going to be. I think over 80 or 85% of our Kickstarter revenue has now come from these higher priced lifetime subscriptions. And we did a survey to get some feedback on that. And what we were told was, hey, look, if I have this lifetime subscription, I can get rid of my monthly VPN bill. I can get rid of that subscription that I hate. Never occurred to us, right? So the feedback that we've gotten and just the learning from Kickstarter, really another great advantage of that community.
Yeah. So I think this is another good point you're making, and one that most people don't think about Kickstarter as a vehicle for testing out various different pricing models and pricing strategies. So I think that's a wonderful point that you just made about those capabilities. So what's next for you guys at Winston Privacy?
Yeah, so right now we're wrapping up the Kickstarter. We're shifting into Indiegogo, and all hands are basically now focused on just scaling and improving the product, right? So we expect to have all of our units shipped by the holiday season, basically by October of this year, and that includes another experiment that we're doing where we're sending a bunch of units out to the UK to see how it does there. Because we have some theories about that market, very different market than the US, that we know for sure. So it's really about iterating, listening to, the people who are now installing Winston, improving things, and reacting as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So it sounds also like you want to branch out. So right now you just sell in the United States or North America?
Well, we started off just selling in the U.S. and Canada. And again, one of those things that we learned from Kickstarter, we had people from all around the world literally begging us to ship them a unit. So we looked at all the different markets. We ended up, because it is a privacy and encryption device, we ended up hiring a attorney out of London just to give us an opinion on this. Like, is this even legal in the UK? And it was, and he said it's totally fine. Sounds like a great product. People would really like it there. And so we opened it up, and we ended up selling quite a few units in the UK. So that was one of those unexpected surprises that came out of Kickstarter as well.
Yeah. So is your pricing strategy different in other parts of the world?
Today it isn't. Certainly as we get bigger, it might. Hard to say. It's a startup. So, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, everything could be completely different.
Yeah. And what about your ability to provide service and support as you start expanding the number of time zones that your customers are in.
Yeah, that was a major factor in our decision-making process. That's why we decided just to limit ourselves to the UK. So again, we can just develop some learning around there. I have sold in Europe before. I know how different it is. The time zone thing is actually not as big of a deal in the UK. And with this product in particular, people don't seem to expect, just to be able to chat with somebody at any time, So email's fine, or forum support is fine. So right now we're just taking a wait-and-see approach with it.
Yeah, excellent. As you reflect back on the things you've done from the TRS-80 all the way up to now, are there one or two things that sort of drive you or motivate you that kind of make you want to explore these things?
Yeah, there are principles, and I think as we get older, we acquire experience, we synthesize that into sort of our own working principles. And I think a big part of entrepreneurship lies in recognizing what those personal principles are and then operating from them. Because, when you're running headlong into this black hole of risk, the traditional, MBA models and things like that, the traditional wisdom doesn't apply anymore. The smartest VCs I've ever talked to, they'll say at best they're batting 50%, because they just don't know what's going to happen. And there's no way to tell. So for me, that comes down to figuring out what your principles are. So as an example, one of the things that really motivated me about this, which I didn't get in other concepts that I looked at, was this ability to help people, right? Just help the average person as opposed to going B2B and, helping some corporation become slightly more efficient in some way. What I felt here was, look, I didn't like the direction that surveillance capitalism was taking the world. It wasn't a world I wanted my kids to grow up in. And for me, it was an opportunity to basically to leverage my talents and my experience to help a multiple of the number of people that I could ever do doing anything else. So that in turn, it sounds kind of lofty, but it really actually did help to inform some practical decisions. So one of the decisions we had to make early on was whether we're going to be a B2B company or a B2C. And I think Winston's interesting because it could be successful in either case. But for me, the personal satisfaction from helping ordinary people just outweighed any of the other considerations. So that's what I mean by operating from principle.
Yeah, excellent. And so in addition to helping other folks, I think that's really interesting what you said, this notion of, if you're B2B, you're fundamentally helping other companies become more efficient or improve their products or services and make more money, I guess. And here you're helping individuals. Are there other sort of guiding principles that help drive you?
Well, persistence, I think, is a big one. There's an old adage by Calvin Coolidge. You can look it up. My dad, when I was a little kid, this was back in, had to be the late 70s or early 80s. He said he would pay me $100 if I can copy this perfectly in a calligraphy pen. And if you've ever done calligraphy, you know how easy it is just to mess up and smudge. So I ended up,
right.
As a little kid, writing this passage out hundreds of times, and it kind of became ingrained in my personal operating system. So persistence is a really big operating principle. If it comes easy, it's probably not defensible, which means that you have to identify problems that are very difficult, and you have to be able to persist longer than everybody else in solving those problems. So that was another principle that played into the development of Winston. So as we went along, I'll tell you the first versions of Winston were really, really bad. They were way too effective at blocking things. In a lot of ways, they resembled, other privacy software out there. So when you block everything, though, you break everything, and the web starts treating you like a virus because you look like one. And so, there's all these challenges that came up with how do we let certain things through and how do we not let other things through? And how do we continue to look like a human and fuzz the boundaries so that they can't tell much about us and can't target us, and still be able to access the web in a really convenient, fast manner? And so this was just a crazy technical challenge, and it did take over a year of just one roadblock after another, things that, I didn't always think we were going to be able to solve, but in the end we did. So that all ties back into the whole idea of this. You have to be operating from core principles.
Yeah, excellent. How big a business is Winston Privacy right now? How many employees do you have?
So we have a mix, right? Wherever we can, we try to contract out, particularly if it's in areas where we don't necessarily need like an ongoing competitive advantage, like industrial design or things like that. So full-time employees, we're around 7 right now, but we just took account. There's over 35 people working with us in some way or another, either in design, coding, sales, marketing, and all those roles combined. So somewhere between 35 and 40.
Right. And in a typical week, I won't ask in a typical day, but in a typical week, where do you spend your time? Can you give us a rough idea of breaking it down, as sort of a CEO of a up and coming company? How does that play out?
Yeah, I would say the first 2 hours of my day is generally spent for answering emails, calls, sort of things that will pile up if you don't tend to them. So I like to chunk these things down and just get them out of the way, and that frees up the rest of the day. Probably about a third of my week is spent in meetings, either with employees or, vendors, possible partners, and so on. I would say probably another 20% of my time is spent communicating with investors. Particularly investors want to talk to you if things are going really bad, or if they're going really well. They really want to talk to you then. And that's a great problem to have, but it does take up a lot of time. So I have investors who text and call me every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, just because they're so excited about the way things are going. And I am too, but you do have to manage that. And whatever's left, I get in the trenches and I work. I'm an engineering marketer, so I tend to spend most of my time in those two areas.
Right. Now you're located in Chicago,
Yes.
Is that correct? And so I would say that, some percentage of folks who wanted to start a business like this would say, you know what, I'm moving to Silicon Valley because that's where the hot spot is, that's where the infrastructure is, et cetera. And you guys decided to stay in Chicago. So talk about that decision-making process a little bit and why you decided to do that.
Well, I think the scarce resource in any startup is the founder. It's not capital. It's not the network, it's the founder, right? And so if I'm the scarce resource, well, that means the other resources are going to come to me. We have family here, and so we said, we're going to stay here. We're going to do it. Now, in the case of Winston, that also really helps us for two other reasons. One is we didn't want to get deeply enmeshed in that big tech network out on the coast, right? So if we were in Silicon Valley, sooner or later, we would be in some sort of relationship, formal or not, with Google or Facebook. And these are companies that we're fundamentally at odds with, because of their just rampant data collection practices. So, being in Chicago has separated us from them. Now, what people don't realize, even though valuations are lower in Chicago, that actually plays into the entrepreneur's favor. So one of the I think the myths, especially with inexperienced entrepreneurs, is they want to get the valuations as high as they can. And Silicon Valley, that whole VC ecosystem feeds into that, right? And they'll give them high valuations. So what happens typically is, if the company does well and they do this hockey stick growth, they follow that curve, which nobody ever does, but for the 1 in a million that does, that works out really well for them. For everybody else, though, you end up with a down round or you get diluted in some way with a subsequent financing round. So one of the pieces of advice I give to entrepreneurs is, don't let your valuations get out of control. And if you share that philosophy, then being in Chicago is great because there aren't as many VCs here. The valuations aren't frothy like they are on the coast. So that is really consistent. The other thing that I would say about the Midwest in general is that returns here are actually better for the VC industry in the Midwest than they are on both coasts. So again, that really plays into the entrepreneur's favor.
Yeah. Yeah, and those returns are driven by valuations. So if the VC's overpaying, so to speak, then his return is going to be less. So if there's lower valuations in certain geographic parts of the country, then there's advantages to sometimes both sides of that equation.
That's right.
Yeah. Excellent. So we've been going at this almost 40 minutes or 40 plus minutes. So I want to wrap it up shortly. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I haven't? Are there other points you want to make?
Anything that you... no, I mean, I think it's a good all-around survey of the experience. No, nothing that comes to mind.
Okay, great. Well, I do have one more question. And if you were sitting down with a young entrepreneur who's, got great enthusiasm and has a great idea, wants to go pursue it, what's the 2 or 3 key pieces of advice you would give them?
That really depends on the context because this happens quite a bit over at MHub. I do have these conversations with people. I think probably speaking generically, you have to hustle, right? So for a first-time entrepreneur, it's a challenge because you're an unknown quantity. So it's not easy for you to just get a meeting with an investor or just to even get advice. It can be difficult. So you have to prove yourself. And the best way to prove yourself as a first-time entrepreneur is to get some revenue. So if you can hustle, and it's a lot easier in B2C, by the way, than it is in B2B because you still have the same problem of not having any track record. But if you can hustle and get revenue and prove that you're actually delivering a product that people want and you have some market fit, that's how you break in as that first-time entrepreneur.
Right.
So the second piece of advice that I give people is whenever you meet with, a VC, especially if they follow up and ask you something, you need to get back to them right away because that's a test. VCs will ask you for things which entrepreneurs complain about, and what they don't realize is that it's not so much about the thing that they asked you for, it's that they want to see how responsive that you are, and if you're actually really fully committed to this, where you get back to them right away. Because if you're working another job, if you're kind of doing it as a hobby, you're not really serious, that tends to show in your responsiveness. So that's one thing I recommend.
Yeah, great advice, Rich. Great advice. Well, hey, let's wrap this up. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me and to share your story at Winston Privacy. It sounds really interesting. And if people want to check you out on Kickstarter or any other way, what's the best way to connect with you guys?
Well, the best way, just go to our website, winstonprivacy.com. You can find us on Kickstarter right now. We'll be on Indiegogo next. But after that, just go to our website.
Okay. Excellent. I will make sure to put a link to winstonprivacy.com into the show notes. And Rich, thanks again. Have a wonderful day, and I wish you guys all the best of luck.
Thanks, Bela. Thanks for having me.
Bela, fantastic interview with Rich Stokes, and really interesting company, Winston Privacy. The first thing I did was jump on the website and go check out this product because it really got me thinking about how we approach security and privacy in our own homes. What were your thoughts?
Well, I thought there was a couple interesting points that he made. And one of them was, I thought, which is kind of, I didn't expect the conversation to go that way, but it was around Kickstarter. And he's using Kickstarter to help fund sort of his first product. And he talked about sort of, some of the careful things, the things you need to be careful about when using Kickstarter, especially in a product that's a hardware product. So he makes a box, that you plug into your network at home. And so he's got a supply chain that he has to manage. He has to take a bill of materials and order parts, etc. And I thought the notion of being careful about the amount of money you raise on Kickstarter and making sure that you don't sort of order too many of your initial bill of material, because chances are you're going to want to change it. And I've seen this happen with companies that we fund, quite frankly, in the venture business, where they have their design complete, and then they want to go immediately overseas to China to get their product sourced. And, there's a 10,000 unit minimum, and it's COD. Or worse than COD, it's you got to put 50% down. And so that sucks up a lot of capital. And chances are, on your first design, 10,000 is way too many to buy, because you're going to have something you're going to want to change. And if you order too many of your first generation product, you're going to end up with a lot of obsolete inventory and product. And that's basically a perfect way to burn cash. So I thought his point there about being careful about that, understanding your supply chain, understanding your order quantities, and doing it in small increments, and not necessarily trying to save 2 cents on every unit in the beginning. You're much more focused on conserving cash and getting the order quantity right, and not having to write off a lot of obsolete product.
Agreed, Bela. And it goes back to a point that I've made a ton of times in the classroom over the years, and that is finance and supply chain go together hand in hand. And if you want to be a really good supply chain person, you need to understand finance. And if you want to be a really good corporate finance person, you have to be a really good supply chain person, because how you burn your capital and your amount of working capital, and understanding terms and understanding the cash to cash cycle, right, where you want to pay for the things that you're buying as far down the line as you can, right? 90 days, 120 days, right? You want to keep that cash and pay later, and you want your customers to pay you, if not now, right, before you even ship the product. So managing this cash cycle is critical. And I think when you're just starting out on Kickstarter, it's really hard or really easy to make a lot of mistakes in terms of managing your cash flow, rather than looking at your unit costs. Unit costs are really important, but cash flow is even more important. So I think this is a great takeaway in terms of this relationship between your financial position and your supply chain. Anytime you're starting a business, but especially when you're using a pre-selling model like Kickstarter or something like that.
Yeah, everyone focuses on unit cost, and it's about cash flow. Right? Mm-hmm. Absolutely about cash flow. Another point that I thought was interesting was after college, he kind of joined a couple of consulting firms, and I think we've seen this before with some other folks we've interviewed. This notion of joining a consulting firm, I think, as Rich put it, gave him great exposure to many different types of companies, great exposure to many different ways of doing business and different corporate cultures. And so I think as a first career move, often this is a great way to sort of get that exposure, work on a lot of different types of problems. And he also figured out that, for the long term, while that consulting experience was good for him, but for the long term, that's not the career he wanted, which I think is an also good learning opportunity and value. Oftentimes figuring out what you don't want to do is just as important as figuring out what you want to do.
Yeah, I loved how, he kind of talked about his career arc of technology going back from his, people don't even remember the Radio Shack TRS-80 he was talking about. That was my first computer too, by the way, back in the, it must have been the late 70s, early 80s. But yeah, and how his career has kind of spanned this arc of technology and this shifting of technology from something that was a discrete box to something that's become really embedded in every part of everybody's lives in most parts of the world. And then you overlay that against his business experience, right? Where he did this consulting, and then he was the advertising person. And he saw how kind of these fields were developing, and it got him to this point in time where he said, aha, here's this product that could be right product, right place, right time to hit it big. So it'll be interesting to see what success that he has with this. But you can really trace back when he tells the story, the path he's taken as to how he got to where he is at this moment, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, another topic that came up that I thought was pretty interesting was his figuring out pricing with his products, sort of doing these experiments to trade off lifetime subscription cost for existing monthly bills, working out various different pricing models and trying to zero in on that. I think the whole notion of pricing one's product is really, really an interesting problem. And, one of the things that oftentimes happens, particularly with hardware companies, is people take the cost of the bill of materials and they multiply it by 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, and that's what the sale price is. And, while that may make them feel comfortable about the margins, that may not be the right way to price it. You may be able to price it for 10 times what your bill of material cost is. You got to think about the value you're providing to your customer. And with his product here, he's actually selling a piece of hardware, but he's sort of thinking about it more from a subscription type of pricing model than necessarily a one-time. But as he learned, some people are much more interested in a one-time pricing model. So you got to figure out what your customers want and what works for them. And sometimes you have to have several different models because different customers are comfortable doing it different ways, right? Think of the automotive industry. Some people like to buy cars outright. Some people like to lease them. And those are sort of different models.
But the monthly payment is important to a lot of people. How much per month? And this is where sometimes, if it's a big expenditure, a monthly payment is a great way to essentially buy something beyond what I could afford to pay cash for. But this was the reverse, where he was saying, look, a one-time payment can end a monthly payment for you. When he was talking about these VPNs, these virtual private networks that are popular now. People are paying, $7, $10, $12 a month for this service, right? And he's like, I can flip this on its head. Instead of using a monthly payment to get me to afford a car or a house, all right, something big, I can flip this and say, hey, by giving me a big chunk of money up front, I can eliminate one of these monthly payments for you and give you peace of mind. I thought that was really cool. And he said, by his own admission, he stumbled on that, right? By doing these experiments, by being curious. And I love that. Here's a guy that's got a lot of work experience, and he's still experimenting. He doesn't assume he knows everything about the customer, which I think is a critical competence of successful entrepreneurs.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. This notion of experimenting, whether it be with your product set, whether it be with your pricing model, whether it be with your distribution model, how you acquire customers, et cetera, I think that's really, really an important characteristic and trait that entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial businesses have to have if they're going to survive in this rapidly changing environment.
Yeah, great. All right, I think it's a wrap, huh?
I agree, Mike. Let's wrap this one up.
Yeah, well, thanks to Rich Stokes for joining us, and Bela, thanks for doing the interview. Listeners, we're always thrilled that you decided to join us on another podcasting adventure for this week, and we hope you found the last hour or so interesting and thought-provoking and learned as much as we did from this. As usual, we have a couple of small requests. First is if you have questions about what we've discussed today, if you have suggestions about topics or potential guests we should talk with in the future, we'd be thrilled if you got in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com. And secondly, if you like what we're doing, please hit subscribe or like on your podcast app. If you want to be radical and write a review for us, we'd really appreciate it. And most importantly, if you know others that might find us interesting, please share us with them.
So that's it for this week. Thank you for spending time with us. We look forward to having you joining us for our next episode. So signing off from my home office, now that I'm retired here in upstate New York, that's it from here. See you, Mike.
Thanks, Bela. And from over here on the other side of the Atlantic in Münster, Germany, I wish everybody a great week. Bye-bye.
This podcast is produced for Mike and I by our friends at Busy Media of Schenectady, New York. They can be found at busymedia.co.